Good morning. You're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Here are the top stories for the hour. An astonishing U-turn from Donald Trump as he backs Ukraine to retake all its occupied territory. The European Commission President says she wants Europe to stop buying Russian oil by the end of the year. And 14 people have been killed in Taiwan as storm Ragasa barrels through East Asia. We start at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, where the US President Donald Trump delivered a fiery address. For almost an hour, the president took aim at his opponents, warning world leaders about illegal migration, climate policies he dismissed as a scam, and the threat of war. Our Ubay Shabanda has more.
President Donald Trump took the United Nations by storm on Tuesday, warning world leaders that their countries could be going to hell if they did not take care to stop the flow of illegal migrants and ensure border security and pursue sensible energy policies. President Trump called climate change the great green scam, saying that it was an attempt by countries in the less developed world that pollute the most to try to move and redistribute industrial capacity from the developed world. President Trump warned Western Europe that the unique nature of their country could face serious threats if they do not follow his administration's policy and pursue border security and stop the flow of millions of illegal migrants into their countries. President Trump also heavily criticized the United Nations for not sufficiently supporting his peace initiatives, including the historical peace summit in the White House that brought the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia to a final conclusion. President Trump also made major waves following his meeting with Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine, praising the Ukrainian leader and telling the press that he believed that Ukraine could, in fact, win the war against the Russian military. President Trump said that Vladimir Putin had brought economic ruin to his country and that he believed that Ukraine has a chance at defeating the Russian war machine. That is a major shift from President Trump's previous positions. We also saw the American president heavily criticize illegal drug cartels, saying that his administration would continue to fight designated foreign terror organizations that were attempting to bring drugs from South America into the United States. So President Trump highlighting a number of economic successes and diplomatic initiatives, while at the same time essentially saying that the United Nations was broken as an institution. And we are also expecting President Trump to meet with President Erdogan of Turkey this week. That is expected to be a major meeting. And President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan is in New York. And he held a number of bilateral meetings, including meetings with senior business leaders here in New York. So the UN General Assembly is off to a big start here, with major headlines being created by the American president. And we are also expecting President Trump to continue to focus on the issue of Gaza. He told the General Assembly that he wants Hamas to immediately release all the remaining hostages in captivity to bring the war to an end. And President Trump also heavily criticized attempts by some countries to unilaterally recognize the state of Palestine. Trump saying that doing so would only simply reward Hamas for the atrocities of October 7th. I'm Ubay Shabanda, A News, New York.
Earlier, we were joined by John Kovalich, senior editor at Issue Insight in New York, who said Donald Trump's speech was strong but scattered, mixing grievances and unexpected remarks with some legitimate points on issues like immigration and energy.
As an analyst, you certainly try to take notes, and my hands are cramping from just the amount of interesting statements he said. I'm going to guess that if you were in the audience, if you at the UNGA listening to President Trump, you were probably getting out a calculator and determining how many days left for this guy. And it turns out 1,462 days that the second term of President Trump will be over. This was about grievances, not unexpected. If the teleprompter had been working, we can sort of begin to imagine what might have transpired if he had had that benefit as well. He was all over. When we have a speech from the President of the United States, the UNGA, that goes from Sharia law in London to I'm not bragging or braggadocious, but I'm always right, to going after President Lula of Brazil, but then saying, well, he's my best friend. I just saw him in the hall. We're going to get together next week, and then continue to lay into him. He was all over the place. Having said that, though, he does have the capacity, which he used today and which he has used in the past, where he does raise legitimate issues, as legitimate would be defined by most people. And immigration is one, energy is one, where there are components within his statements, as outrageous as the statements may be, where you will say, yeah, that makes sense, but I wish you would just stop there as opposed to keep going and trying to explain it.
In a game-changing U-turn, President Donald Trump has pivoted from pressing Ukraine to surrender territory to now suggesting it's able to win all its land back. Trump called Russia's campaign aimless and added that NATO countries should respond if any Russian aircraft enter its airspace.
US President Donald Trump now believes Ukraine can reclaim all land lost to Russia with the help of the European Union and NATO support. He made the comment on Truth Social after meeting Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City on Tuesday. He also called Russia's campaign aimless and described it as a paper tiger, saying Moscow's weakening economy made this the time for Kyiv to act. His remarks signal a dramatic reversal from his earlier calls for Kyiv to make concessions in order to end the war. In February, he clashed with Zelensky in a heated Oval Office exchange, telling the Ukrainian leader he didn't have the cards to win. And just last month, Trump gave Russian President Vladimir Putin a high-profile welcome in Alaska. Zelensky called Trump's new stance a big shift, saying the US president could be a game changer in the conflict.
If he will be sure in Ukraine, and I think that he is more close now to this situation, and that's why, and between us, only Trump can, for today. We know some not too much players in the world who can be game changers, but he's the most closer to this.
Trump also toughened his stance on Moscow, saying NATO nations should shoot down Russian jets that violate their airspace.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has pushed for the international community to act towards ending the war in Ukraine and criticized China's inaction as he addressed the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for action in ending the war as he addressed the United Nations Security Council gathering on Tuesday.
We must admit the world's attention to the UN is fading. The organization has less influence, and too often there is a lack of real decisions on fundamental issues. This is exactly what we need to speak about today, about the tools that sadly are not working now. But they will work, I'm sure. They will work if you are active, if we are active.
He also pressed for Russia to negotiate for peace and said he had met with U.S. President Donald Trump and discussed a few good ideas to advance peace. He also argued that China has the power to pressure Russia to end the war, but said the country has remained largely inactive China's deputy ambassador said Beijing has remained impartial, calling for a ceasefire and political talks while pursuing diplomatic and peace efforts. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio underlined that President Trump has devoted significant effort to securing an agreement, but warned his patience is limited.
The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary in order to bring this to an end.
Russia's deputy ambassador, meanwhile, dismissed the session as little more than a staged platform, insisting it added nothing of value to the peace process, while stating that if others are serious about peace, Moscow is ready to engage. The debate revealed deep divisions, yet a common refrain: the war must end, though how to get there remains starkly contested.
At the United Nations General Assembly, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said she backs Trump's plea for Europe to end its reliance on Russian oil by the end of the year. Speaking on the sidelines with US President Donald Trump, von der Leyen echoed his stance on energy security. In a meeting in New York, von der Leyen said Trump is absolutely right. We're on it.
And then recently I started
President Trump is absolutely right. We're on it. We have reduced already massively the gas supply from Russia, completely gotten out of Russian coal, and massively also reduced the oil supply, but there's still some coming to the European continent. So what we do now, we put sanctions out to those ports where, for example, LNG is coming from Russia. And we want to put tariffs on oil supplies that are still coming to the European Union.
A teenager has been reportedly taken into custody after a powerful explosion occurred in central Oslo. Norwegian media reports that the suspect is 13 years old. Police said they conducted a controlled detonation of a second explosive device found at the scene. No injuries were reported. The explosion took place near a university campus and 500 meters from the Israeli embassy. Officials say that the additional device appeared to be a military-style hand grenade. Iran is facing a potential return of UN sanctions, threatening its economy and raising tensions across the Middle East. The move comes over concerns about Tehran's nuclear program and its compliance with international agreements.
Iran is on the brink of facing the return of United Nations sanctions, a move that could further strain its fragile economy and heighten regional tensions. On 28 August 2025, Britain, France and Germany, called the E3, started the process to reimpose sanctions under the 2015 nuclear deal, accusing Iran of not fully cooperating with UN inspectors and expanding its uranium stockpiles. The 30-day period to solve the issue through diplomacy ends at midnight on the 27th of September. The 2015 deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, was signed by Britain, Germany, France, the US, Russia and China. It lifted UN, US and EU sanctions in exchange for limits on Iran's nuclear program. The deal also includes a snapback clause, which lets countries reimpose sanctions if Iran is found to be seriously breaking the rules. Once this snapback is triggered, the UN Security Council has 30 days to vote on whether to keep the sanctions relief. The vote needs at least 9 countries in favour and no vetoes from the US, Russia, China, Britain or France. Experts say the vote is likely to fail, which means all UN sanctions would return unless the Council takes other action.
So snapback is one of the last remaining mechanisms of the Iran nuclear agreement, or the JCPOA, that allows any signatory of the agreement to unilaterally snap back the UN sanctions that were imposed on Iran. And the European countries, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, have made a commitment to invoke snapback sanctions, which are meant to expire in October of this year. And they're doing so because they want to preserve this mechanism that they think is an important tool of leverage and pressure as part of the deal. But also, they would like to use this pressure on Iran to return oversight on Iran's nuclear program, as well as return to the negotiating table in order to bring more transparency and accountability on this important international issue.
If snapback happens, previous UN restrictions would come back. These include an arms embargo, bans on uranium enrichment and missile activity, targeted freezes of Iranian assets, travel bans, and the right for countries to inspect Iranian cargo for banned items. France, Britain and Germany have suggested a short extension to allow more time for talks, while Russia and China have proposed a resolution to extend the deal until April 2026, which could prevent the E3 from reimposing sanctions. After the US left the JCPOA in 2018, Iran slowly reduced its compliance with the deal, rapidly increasing uranium enrichment to 60% purity, close to weapons grade. Western countries say civilian nuclear use does not require such high levels, while Iran maintains its program is peaceful. Earlier this year, a 12-day conflict with Israel also complicated monitoring as strikes hit Iranian nuclear sites. Diplomats are still trying to find a solution.
In the context of our consultations and negotiations with them, this issue features quite prominently, of course. I saw the foreign minister yesterday. I will see him again today. Like other, important participants in this process, starting, of course, with E3, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and, of course, the United States. So I would say there is an intense process of consultations and conversations at the moment, trying to assess whether there is a possibility to find a solution which could prevent that from happening. Of course, there is a dimension which is beyond my own remit, quite clearly, on the political sphere, for the countries that decided to launch this process, to decide and see. But of course, we are trying to play a role as guarantors.
The return of UN sanctions shows the ongoing challenge of managing Iran's nuclear program while keeping global security, putting diplomacy and sanctions at the center of a tense geopolitical fight.
At least 14 people have died and 124 remain missing in Taiwan after a barrier lake burst as a super typhoon barraged through East Asia. The lake, formed by landslides from earlier heavy rains, released an estimated 60 million tonnes of water, destroying roads and homes. About 5,200 people sought refuge on higher floors, while military teams and rescue workers delivered aid amid mud and debris. Ragasa, equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane, has moved on to China's southern coast and Hong Kong, prompting the evacuation of over 1 million people in its path. Now, NASA says its first crewed Artemis mission, a 10-day journey around the moon and back, is on track for launch in April 2026, with the possibility of even moving it forward to February. The space agency will send 4 astronauts on a journey around the moon aboard the Orion capsule, the first such mission in more than 50 years. NASA says the voyage would give people a front row seat to history. The crew features Americans Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover and Christina Koch, alongside Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. The mission is designed as a key step toward a planned lunar landing in 2027.
There at about 150.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Azerbaijani Deputy Prime Minister Shahin Mustafayev have met in Tehran. The two discussed bilateral relations between the two countries, focusing on further expanding existing ties. Artura Shirelilu has more on the meeting from Tehran.
Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian and the Deputy Prime Minister of Azerbaijan, Shahin Mustafayev, met in Tehran, discussing bilateral ties and ways of development of the relations endorsed in the meetings of the leaders of the two countries. According to the news release of the Iranian President's office, Pezeshkian said Tehran is interested in expanding its relations with Baku in all political, economic, and cultural areas. He added that there is no obstacle in the path of developing interactions and cooperation between the two countries, as Iran wants enhanced relations with neighboring countries. The visiting dignitary welcomed improved relations with Iran, saying that following President Pezeshkian's state visit to Baku in April, the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, ordered to put on agenda the serious and diligent implementation of agreements reached during his visit. The Pezeshkian-Mustafayev meeting took place on the eve of the Iranian President's departure to New York on Tuesday to take part in the 80th UN General Assembly session. According to local sources, President Pezeshkian is scheduled to deliver a speech at the World Body on Wednesday afternoon, New York time, and meet counterparts on the sidelines of the annual event. This year's General Assembly is highly significant for Iran, as it convenes days ahead of the likely return of UN nuclear sanctions against Iran by end of September. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
The President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, has held a series of meetings during his visit at the UN headquarters in New York. Aliyev met with the presidents of Finland, Kenya and Iraq, the Prime Minister of Greece and the Secretary General of the Council of Europe to discuss issues like diplomacy, energy and infrastructure.
On September the 23rd at the UN headquarters in New York, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev met with leaders of different countries as well as the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, focusing on peace and partnership issues. President Aliyev met with the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. The Greek leader highlighted the importance of the Washington meeting for regional peace. President Aliyev underlined Azerbaijan's role as initiator of the peace process with Armenia and stressed the significance of the agreement on establishing an unimpeded transport corridor with Nakhchivan. The sides also praised successful energy cooperation and agreed to expand ties in trade and tourism. One of the notable meetings took place between Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Iraqi President Abdul Latif Jamal Rashid. The meeting addressed the role of the Intergovernmental Commission in developing relations between Azerbaijan and Iraq, as well as cooperation in energy, tourism and other fields. Additionally, they exchanged views on cooperation within international organisations, including the UN, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, the Non-Aligned Movement and other institutions. President Ilham Aliyev also met with Kenyan President William Ruto. The two leaders welcomed the positive momentum in ties, noting that the opening of Azerbaijan's embassy in Kenya gave new impetus to bilateral cooperation. They underlined the importance of mutual visits and highlighted opportunities in energy, agriculture and industry, as well as cooperation within international organisations. During his New York visit, the Azerbaijani president met with Finnish President Alexander Stubb to discuss regional cooperation. The Finnish leader also congratulated Azerbaijan on the progress in the peace process with Armenia and praised historic achievements in Washington. President Aliyev recalled that during Finland's OSCE chairmanship, the decision to dissolve the Minsk group was made, stressing that Azerbaijan and Armenia have now entered a period of peace. The two sides also discussed bilateral cooperation and Azerbaijan-EU relations. Another important meeting was held with Alain Berset, Secretary General of the Council of Europe. Aliyev and Berset discussed the Washington Declaration and the importance of dissolving the OSCE Minsk group. President Aliyev thanked the Council of Europe for supporting peace efforts, while Berset recalled his visit to Azerbaijan during COP29 and expressed readiness to continue cooperation.
Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev is in New York meeting with representatives of major businesses and international organizations. On the top of the agenda are large-scale investment projects with American companies, which could develop into long-term partnerships. Our Fariza Kalimurzina has the details.
Kazakhstan and the United States have signed the largest agreement in their history for the supply and production of locomotives, valued at $4.2 billion. Under the agreement, the American company Wabtec will manufacture 300 freight locomotives at a plant in Astana. The signing of the agreement followed a talk between Presidents Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and Donald Trump. The president also took part in a round table with representatives of American businesses. Speaking to investors, President Tokayev outlined key areas for cooperation, including geological exploration, uranium mining and processing, and the expansion of existing energy projects. According to Tokayev, Kazakhstan supplies about 40% of the world's uranium needs, and nearly 25% of U.S. uranium imports come from Kazakhstan. One of the key messages at the meeting was the recognition of the U.S. contribution to Kazakhstan's economy. The U.S. remains the largest investor with total investments exceeding $100 billion. And more than 630 American companies are currently operating in Kazakhstan. Special attention was given to Tokayev's meeting with Chevron chairman and CEO Michael Woos. Tokayev noted that since independence, Chevron has invested about $55 billion in Kazakhstan. And a quarter of the company's total oil production comes from fields in the country. Also, discussions focused on the expansion of Tengiz, the development of gas projects at Karachaganak, and the diversification of export routes, including the Middle Corridor. President Tokayev emphasized that Kazakhstan aims to reduce its dependence on traditional export routes and sees new logistics solutions as a key factor in the sustainable development of the energy sector. Digital transformation is another key area for American involvement. A meeting was held with David Zapolsky, Senior VP of Amazon, to discuss projects with the Minister of Artificial Intelligence and Kazakh Telecom. Amazon sees Kazakhstan as a regional hub for satellite communications. And during the visit, a distribution agreement was signed between Amazon Kuiper and Kazakh Telecom, with plans to build infrastructure in Almaty, Akkol, and Aktau.
I also want to thank your staff and all the people who worked very hard to get to this point with our agreement, both with the government and with Kazakh Telecom. Congratulations on your embrace of the initiative to have a digital code and to embrace digital technologies. We couldn't be more proud that this is our first major and largest major investment in Central Asia. We're excited about the prospect of teaming with Kazakh Telecom to bring high-speed, low-cost internet service to the people of Kazakhstan, and we're looking forward to making that, moving that investment forward.
Among Kazakhstan's strategic partners is Cerberus Capital Management. Its CEO Frank Bruno met with President Tokayev to discuss Cerberus' role in financing infrastructure for the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route. Tokayev invited Cerberus to participate in projects along the route and highlighted that since the historic peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia in Washington, the Middle Corridor's importance has grown, with cargo traffic increasing 6 times over the past 5 years.
We share a lot of optimism about the potential of what can be accomplished, and with Kazakhstan in the middle of the Middle Corridor and the opportunities for logistics, telecommunications around the region, we think it's a tremendous opportunity. We're very excited about it.
President Tokayev also invited American companies to invest in Kazakhstan's agricultural sector. He highlighted that Kazakhstan is among the top 10 grain exporters in the world and ranks 6th in arable land area. On the sidelines of the 80th UN General Assembly session, Tokayev held a series of high-level meetings. Among them were talks with the President of Montenegro, the UN Secretary General, the President of the European Council, and the President of Ukraine. From Almaty, Kazakhstan, Fariza Kalimurzina, A News.
Syria is preparing to elect the first parliament since Bashar al-Assad was toppled, a milestone in the transition from his rule, but one that has stirred new concerns about political inclusivity under interim President Ahmed al-Shara.
Syria is preparing to establish its first parliament since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, a milestone in its transition, but one already stirring doubts about political inclusivity under interim President Ahmed al-Shara. On October 5th, regional electoral colleges will select 140 of the 210 lawmakers in the People's Assembly. The remaining 70 will be appointed by al-Shara.
The elections will be held among the members of the electoral colleges. Every member of the electoral college has the right to be a candidate for membership in the People's Assembly and has the right to vote. On this principle, elections will be held on one day across Syrian territory. These electoral colleges will select the members of the People's Assembly to constitute 2/3 of the members of the People's Assembly. After that, the President of the Republic will appoint the final third, thus the People's Assembly will be completed according to this mechanism.
The 11-member election body appointed by Shara oversaw the creation of colleges from some 6,000 electors. However, the rules exclude supporters of the former administration and those advocating foreign intervention or separatism. Voting has been postponed in Raqqa, Hasaka and Swaida, leaving a dozen seats unfilled.
I think that the upcoming People's Assembly is being formed in an acceptable way for a transitional phase and not a permanent state. As a transitional period, there is a difficulty to hold popular elections due to the loss of documents, and half of the population is outside of Syria, also without documents.
The Assembly, created under a temporary constitution, will serve for 30 months with limited legislative powers until permanent elections are possible.
Baku is hosting the executive board meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Labour Centre, a key platform for fostering cooperation on labour rights, employment and social protection. The meeting comes as countries face global challenges from digital transformation and platform economies to climate change and international labour mobility.
Spanning 3 continents and 57 nations, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is one of the largest intergovernmental body and represents the collective voice of 1.8 billion Muslims. For over 50 years, the OIC has been a platform for solidarity, addressing political challenges, promoting social development, and amplifying the global influence of its members. Since joining the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in 1991, Azerbaijan has emerged as one of its most active members, championing Islamic unity and hosting major Organization of Islamic Cooperation events that highlight its role as a regional leader and a bridge between the Islamic world and the wider international community.
Azerbaijan makes significant contributions to the cause of Islamic solidarity. We are an active member of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. On Azerbaijan's initiative, the OIC Youth Forum, the OIC Labour Centre, and the Association of Journalists from OIC member states were established. In 2017, Azerbaijan declared the Year of Islamic Solidarity. Azerbaijan also stands at the forefront of countries actively combating Islamophobia.
Against this backdrop, Baku today hosted the executive board meeting of the OIC Labour Centre, attended by labour ministers and delegations from member states. Convened ahead of the centre's second General Assembly, the meeting focused on strengthening the institution's role as a platform for advancing labour rights, expanding employment opportunities, and enhancing social protection across the OIC region.
The center began operations in early 2024 and has already become central to regional labour cooperation. Labour Centre's primary goal is to strengthen social development across member states by supporting labour, employment and social protection programs while promoting knowledge exchange and cooperation to advance decent work.
Chair of the Executive Board and Azerbaijan's Minister of Labour and Social Protection of Population, Anar Aliyev, underlined Azerbaijan's commitment to Islamic solidarity and highlighted the Labour Centre as a vital platform for fostering cooperation among member states.
Global and regional challenges, including technological changes, climate change, migration, and various crises, are having a significant impact on the labour market worldwide. In this context, the Labour Centre plays a crucial role as a platform for strengthening solidarity and promoting cooperation among member states. From this perspective, I invite all member states to ensure the effective functioning of the Labour Centre, as it can successfully fulfil its mission only through the joint participation and cooperation of its members.
As the centre focuses on strengthening employment and social protection, members noted the shared responsibility of countries to equip their youth with the skills and opportunities needed to thrive.
The young generations can find their jobs very quickly, can get the best trainings possible, and our societies can evolve and put up with the changes that the employment and labor landscape know. Mainly the platform economies, namely the information technology and digital changes that you know. But we have also changes and shifts in terms of climate change that affect jobs and employment. And we have this new phenomenon that is the international labor mobility that affects also the resources on the human resources.
Looking ahead, speakers highlighted the key priorities for the future, focusing on digital transformation, reskilling and regional cooperation to strengthen labour markets across the Islamic world.
The participants reviewed progress and financial reports, adopted strategic plans and approved initiatives, including a new employment support and innovation fund. This meeting underlines Azerbaijan's leadership in regional labor cooperation. I'm Ayten Shukurova with Natik Mehmedov from Baku, A News.
The Secretary-General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Wamkale Mena, has visited Azerbaijan for high-level talks. His visit focused on exploring partnerships to make public services more accessible to citizens using technology and expanding cooperation between Africa and the South Caucasus. In an exclusive interview to A News, he touched upon the spheres for future cooperation.
And on this occasion, we met with Hassan to discuss an arrangement of collaboration on the digital economy and digitization, particularly digitization of government services. As you know, Hassan has a very, very successful and effective digitalization strategy, which many countries around the world are looking at very, very closely with a view to modeling it for their own improvement and efficiency of government services. So we had a very good discussion there. And we also had discussions that focused on trade and investment relations between Azerbaijan and the African continent. I hope that an outcome of this meeting will be a collaboration arrangement on the digital economy, on digitization, between the AFCFTA Secretariat and Hassan under the President's authority.
Azerbaijan and Turkey have taken another step forward in strengthening their cooperation in the field of education. A bilateral meeting between the ministries of the two countries was held at Karabağ University in the city of Kankendi.
Azerbaijan and Turkey advanced their education cooperation with a bilateral meeting at Qarabağ University in Khankendi. The high-level meeting brought together Azerbaijan's Minister of Science and Education Emin Emrullayev and Turkey's Minister of National Education Yusuf Tekin. Discussions highlighted the dynamic and successful development of Azerbaijan-Turkey relations in the education sector in recent years. Following the talks, two important documents were signed: the additional protocol to the Agreement on Cooperation in the Field of Education, originally signed in 2017, and the additional protocol to the Protocol on Cooperation in Vocational Education between the two governments. Officials stressed that these agreements will further deepen ties in general and vocational education, opening up new opportunities for academic collaboration and exchange between the two brotherly nations.
And that's the news update from us in Baku this morning. Stay tuned to A News for more.